Welcome to the first lab, View and Modify Network Settings. I'm not going to read all the instructions in the lab, but I am going to go through the critical parts that I think you need to understand. The first operating system that we are going to work with is Linux. Now, Linux is very popular on servers, for things like web servers, file servers. It exists all over the place. The majority of websites in the world are being served by Linux web servers. If you're running an Android operating system, Android uses Linux. If you use a Mac operating system, Macs are based off of a Unix system, which is basically a proprietary version of Linux. So it's important to understand how Linux works, how we can work with it. So you can see here on my screen, I've got a Linux virtual machine. I'm basically running a Linux computer inside my computer. If you boot up a Linux computer, it's going to look somewhat similar to this. For this demonstration, I'm using the version of Linux called Knoppix. It's just a certain set of packages that are bundled together with a certain flavor. There's lots of different versions of Linux, but this is the one that we are going to use. So I'm going to come down and start following the instructions. So it tells me Knoppix is going to boot up. I can see here I've got my Knoppix computer running, so that's great. Now I need to launch the terminal by clicking on the icon highlighted in the image below. So I'm going to find this icon down here. It's a black background with a greater than
LX
symbol.
terminal. Knoppix @ sign micro Knoppix $.
And it is going to bring up this terminal, and I'm going to mute
Frame.
audio
Volume.
here because I don't need any audio. And you'll see I have a prompt here. Here's where I can enter text commands. And it tells me my username is Knoppix. And Micro-Knoppix is just the name of the computer, basically. So my terminal's open. That's good. I'm seeing something similar to that screenshot, so that's great. Now I'm going to run a command ifconfig. ifconfig and hit enter. So ifconfig stands for interface configuration. This is where I can view the configuration of my network interfaces or my network cards. Usually it's going to be an Ethernet adapter, or if you have a Wi-Fi connection, it's going to be a Wi-Fi adapter. You can see here I have two different connections. I have my ETH0. ETH stands for Ethernet. And then I have LO. LO stands for loopback. And usually we can safely ignore this loopback adapter. It's an adapter it's not a physical adapter on your machine. It's just an adapter that exists for your operating system to allow different programs on your computer to communicate using network protocols. We can just ignore all of this information for now. Important thing to look in this output. I have a hardware address. That is the unique physical address of my network interface card. Every hardware address in the entire world will be unique. I also have an INET address. This is my Internet Protocol version 4 address. It's currently set to 10.0.2.15. That was set automatically for me. I didn't have to change that. That's just the way it came. You can also see my subnet mask. This is a very important one. It's 255.255.255.0. Now, most of the time we want our computers to obtain this information automatically, but there are times that we want to set it manually. I just want to show you one thing real quick. If I run if space config, this is a mistake a lot of beginning students make when working from the command line, not using a graphical user interface. When I hit enter, it doesn't do the same thing, right? I'm basically just started the if program, so this is not going to work. I need to exit out of this program because I mistyped that command. So I'm going to type Control-C to quit, and now I'm back to the command line prompt. If I run ifconfig again, I can see that information. There's sometimes when you run a command, the information is too much, it fills up one screen. You may have to scroll up to see all of the information. So let's look at what we need to do here in this lab. We've ran ifconfig, we've got 2 adapters. Okay, so now we want to change our IP address. Let's say we're not happy with the IP address that we were assigned, we want to change it. So let's come in here. I'm going to attempt this command. And I say attempt because it's going to fail, and we'll talk about why. So I'm going to use the same ifconfig command, and I'm going to tell it eth0 because that is the specific network adapter I want to configure. I'm going to give this adapter a specific IP address of my choosing, which is given to me in the lab, with net mask 255.255.255.0. Okay, looks good. So I'm going to hit enter to try to change my IP address, and oh no, it tells me it couldn't do it, basically. There's some strange error messages here. SIOC, SIFADDR. You can ignore that part. But you can see it says operation not permitted 3 times. It's not letting us change our IP address. Okay, so what we have to do, well, the reason this fails is that we did not run this command with sufficient privileges. I ran this command as a regular Knoppix user, and I did not have administrative privileges. So I need to elevate my privileges. We're going to use the command sudo su. Now sudo is a way to prefix any command and say run this one command with administrative privileges. And the su command in Linux is the switch user command. Now, if you don't specify a particular user that you want to switch to, Linux will default to switching you to the root or the main administrator account. So I'm going to run sudo su. So that basically tells my computer, I really, really want you to switch my user to the root account. We can see that it was successful. Now my account is root. That's basically administrative rights. So that's good. So I'm going to run the exact same command I ran before. Interface config eth0 192.168.1.10 net mask 255.255.255.0. Hit enter. Okay, now Linux didn't tell me anything. This is kind of the Linux philosophy. No news is good news. No news is good news. If you enter the command and you don't see any output, chances are that it worked correctly. Now I can check to see if my IP address has been set now. I'm going to just run ifconfig. And now I can see that indeed my IP address is now 192.168.1.10. So that's perfect. The key idea is that you have to have root privileges to change your IP address. So everything worked properly. One thing that we'll have to do, especially when we get into routing later on in this semester, is change our default gateway. Our default gateway tells our computer where to send information if it's not on our local area network. Typically, our default gateway is going to be a router. If you look at your IP address configuration when you're at home connected to your wireless router, your default gateway is probably going to be the IP address of your wireless router. So we can see if we have a default gateway set just by running the route command. We don't have one set. If you happen to have one set, you can run the command route del default. Because I did not have a default gateway set, this command gave me a warning. It says no such process. Well, the only reason it told me that was because there was basically nothing to delete. I was trying to delete something that wasn't there, so it gave me an error. This error, we don't have to worry about. That's fine. You can delete your default gateway. Just run that command just to be sure that you're not going to get any problems later when you try to add a new default gateway. Now if we want to set our default gateway, I'm going to use this route add command. Route add default gateway GW 192.168.1.1. Hit enter, and again, I don't see anything. It's not telling me it succeeded, it's not telling me that it failed, so that typically means it worked. I can type route. It'll take a few seconds this time to show me the new routing table, to show me if my default gateway is there. Waiting patiently on the output. I don't know why this command always takes so long to run, but it usually does. Now I can see I do have a default gateway here. So that is set correctly. It worked fine. So key, to set your default gateway on a Linux computer, you can use the route del default command, and then you have to add your new default gateway. These commands also have to be done using the root privileges, or else it just won't work. Okay, so we've used several commands. We've used ifconfig to view and change our IP address. We use sudo to elevate one specific command, to run that command with root privileges. Specifically, we ran sudo su to switch user to the root account. We use ifconfig with additional parameters to change our IP address. We ran the route command to check to see if we had a default gateway. We use route del default to delete any default gateway that may have existed. And we use route add default GW and then the IP address to set our default gateway. It's kind of basics for working with Linux. When we're done with this, if I type exit here, it's going to exit out of the root account and bring me back to my regular Knoppix account. And I can show you route del default. It'll tell me operation not permitted. Again, if I run sudo route del default, that command worked because I had additional privileges because of that sudo command. It's good to become familiar with Linux, especially if you're planning to go into a computer field, technology field. It's just it's an operating system that you just have to know. For now, that's all we need to do with this Linux machine. This is a virtual machine, so I'm just going to save its state, close it down. Now this next section, we're going to get into Windows networking. Especially in businesses, Windows computers are extremely common. You have to know how to change basic network settings in Windows to troubleshoot, to build networks, to test things. I'm using a virtual machine again. That's why I've got kind of a weird background, but it's going to work just fine for what we need it to do. I am going to, in Linux we opened up the terminal. In Windows I am going to open the command prompt. So I'm going to click my start menu and I'm going to search for CMD. the best match is the command prompt. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. The user account I'm using is IE user. That's fine. We don't have to really worry about that. Let's come down. If we want to view our network connection information, I am going to run ipconfig. So this is different than Linux. Linux is ifconfig for interface configuration. In Windows, it's ipconfig. Now it's showing me my different network adapters. There's a few. The only one I need to worry about is this Ethernet adapter. I can see my IP address happens to be the same one that was by default, same as my Linux machine. ipconfig here stands for Internet Protocol Configuration. Another difference between Windows and Linux is that this ipconfig, I cannot change my Internet Protocol configuration using ipconfig. I can only view it. Now, if you run ipconfig on your machine, you might have many more network adapters than are listed here. You might have one for Wi-Fi. You might have one for a cellular network card. You might have virtual private network connections. You just might have a bunch more. We want to find our active one. For me, it's going to be my Ethernet adapter. I'm going to scroll down and look at what we should be configuring. If we just run ipconfig, we see some basic information. I can run ipconfig, then put a space, a /, and ALL. ipconfig/all is the way I would say that command. So I run that and I see even more information. So for my Ethernet adapter, there's some additional information like my physical address. In Linux, this was listed as my hardware address. This is the MAC address. It means the exact same thing. There's a lot more information that we can use to troubleshoot. So this is good. This command's working. Everything looks good. Should compare the two. Compare ipconfig/all to ipconfig. Look at what running the /all gives you. So that's some investigation that you should go ahead and do on your own. Pause the video if you want to. Do it after the video is over. Whatever works for you. Now we're going to go to the Windows graphical user interface to actually make some changes to our IP address. So I'm going to click here, click the Start menu, and I'm going to type view network typo. I want to find view network connections, that exact wording, on the control panel. So once I see that view network connections, I'm going to go ahead and click that. I'm going to see my network adapters there. So I've got the one here, I've got my Ethernet adapter. Again, you'll probably have more. You'll probably have Ethernet, you'll probably have Wi-Fi, maybe cellular, and a couple more. So that's good. You can see in the lab guide, there's several more adapters. One challenging thing that many beginning networking students have to run across is knowing which one is your active connection. For many people, it's going to be Wi-Fi. If you have a network cable plugged in, it would be your Ethernet. If you've got Wi-Fi turned off, no cable plugged in, it might be cellular. You've got to use your best judgment to figure out which one of these connections is active. It's easy for me now in my virtual machine because I only have one network adapter. I know that one is my one and only active network connection. So I'm going to right-click on it and go to Properties. You can see the shield. It means I need administrative privileges to do this. I have those privileges. So I came to Properties. Now I'm going to scroll down here until I find Internet Protocol version 4, TCP/IP v4. and I'm going to come into these properties. Most of this other stuff, you'll very, very rarely use it. These Internet Protocol version 4 properties, you'll use it all the time, at least in networking classes. So I'm going to click Properties, and I have a couple of options. I can obtain an IP address automatically, so that's selected. That's why when I booted up this virtual machine, it already had the 10.0.2.15 IP address. So this matches, the lab guide matches what I'm seeing in my virtual machine, so that's good. So let's go ahead and change our IP address. So we want to use the following IP address. I want to use 195.168.50.12. Subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. So when I hit tab after entering the 12, Windows automatically filled this in for me. It filled it in using the correct default, so that's good. Note here that I can change my default gateway from the same graphical user interface. In Linux, I had to do the route del default, route add default gateway, remember all that stuff. Windows makes this a bit easier for us. We could set that default gateway right here when we change our IP address. I'm not going to do that right now. Everything's fine. I'm going to come back to my command prompt and run ipconfig. And now I've got that new IP address that I just set. So that's good. So in Windows, key idea is that I use the graphical user interface to change my IP address. I can use ipconfig from my command prompt to view the changes, to make sure that they were successful. So we used ipconfig, we use ipconfig/all, being aware of that output. You should know how to use now, so follow along, make sure that you can do the same thing. Make sure that you can change your IP address subnet mask and find where to change your default gateway in Windows. So for your submission, I want you to change your IP address. Use 192.168.m.d, where M is your birth month and D is your birthday. So if you're born on May 17th, your IP address should be 192.168.5.17. Use 255.255.255.0 for the subnet mask. And set your default gateway to 192.168.m.1, again, where M is your birth month. Don't put in the letter M. Windows isn't going to like that. So an example, if your birthday was May 17th, is in the screenshot below. Run ipconfig, take a screenshot. That's one. This exercise, the submission, this is what we are going to do in class. It would be good to practice this on your own. Make sure that you can complete this activity successfully. This is something that you will have to do all the time. Every single lab virtually that we do in class dealing with routers and switches will require that you set your IP address. So a note about taking screenshots. Windows has a built-in snipping tool. You can start the snipping tool, click New, and then drag a box around the part of the screen that you want to take a screenshot of. Then you can save this. So you can save the snip as a PNG file is best. It's a portable network graphics file format. That works really well. If you want to go above and beyond, I recommend getting a free program called Greenshot. Greenshot, I've configured Greenshot to work with the print screen button, so whenever I click print screen, I get these crosshairs that ask me where I want to save everything. I can capture part of the screen. I can edit this in the image editor. So this is my Greenshot editor. You can highlight things. It's super awesome. Greenshot is free. Get it from getgreenshot.org. Windows, it's supported on Windows. It's also coming to Mac. It was Windows forever. It's been Windows only for a long time, but it is coming to the Mac operating system, hopefully all platforms soon. It's honestly one of the first things I install whenever I get a brand new computer. So be familiar with these skills. Come to class with any questions that you have. But viewing and changing your computer's network settings, these are absolutely critical skills that you need to know. Thanks, everyone.